What's up, everybody? As you can see, this is not a moto screen. So I was kind of bored and messing around and was like, what am I going to record today? And ultimately decided, what question do I get asked the most on stream? Hey, do you think it'd be okay to unban this? What do you think about Watsy unbanning this card? This needs to be banned. Less so that last one, but more the first couple. What do you think needs to be unbanned? So I thought I would do like my own little tier list here. It's not something that I've ever done before. I've never done a tier list, and thought it would be kind of funny to walk through my reasoning for all of these cards and where I think they need to fall. So first off, let's go through our categories. I guess they're like that side on the screen. So up at the very top, never deserves the light of day. This card needs to stay banned now and forever. No reason for it to ever come off the ban list. Right below that, probably safe to keep banned. These are the cards that are like not at that highest tier of ban level, but it's probably safer to just leave it on the ban list and not worry about it. Cards that are like really, really strong, really impactful, and they might not be your immediate choices for banning, but you'd probably rather err on the safe side and not deal with like unbannings than immediate rebannings and stuff like that. Number 3, can make an argument for unbanning in current modern. For me, this means like cards that were banned at a certain time in modern's history where things have changed since then. The format's a bit different. I think these cards are a little bit less impactful than they were, and we can probably take a look at like maybe introducing them back into the format. Unban you cowards. These are the things that I think are completely fine. Like, I know some of them are going to be questionable, but they're cards that I believe don't deserve to be here for whatever reason. The difference between this and the can make an argument is, for the can make an argument, I would just say like everybody's got their own opinion on that card. I think for the most part, you could formulate some sort of a thought as to why it should be off the ban list, and some people are going to argue it can be. But for unban you cowards, like I can't think of a reason to keep it on the ban list. Functional edits. This is a category I wanted to do where there's going to be a couple cards here that would probably also go in other categories, but I'll at least mention them in this one while I'm at it. And it's cards that I think like you could take some functional part of the design and either clear it out or alter it just slightly to make it a playable card and legal in modern, without entirely messing up the card itself. And a lot of this is going to come down to keywords like, I don't know, companion. So we'll go over those as we get to them. The Watsy unban please is actually different from the unban you cowards. There's a couple of cards on the list that if you've been in one of my live streams, you know that I am a big proponent of these cards and think that they should be unbanned. So I'm going to put them in this category. They probably also make it into another one, but they're cards that I think are fine. And chat highly, highly disagrees with me. So whatever, chat's wrong. But I'm going to make a note of them as I go through them. And then the very last category, I think, is one that doesn't get talked about enough. And these are cards that I think need to be banned for reasons not related to the power level of the card. These are things that make like tournament play awkward, make round time go to extensive length, things like that. Things beyond really the control of the game. And all I mean by that is like actions involved around these cards create issues with smoothly running an event. And I think that's honestly enough of a reason to keep some of them on the ban list. So we're just going to go like one by one, down on the bottom, starting with Clark Clan Ironworks, and we'll snake our way through and throw them up on the board. So first and foremost, KCI itself, Cart Clan Ironworks. I put it in the non-power level section. I think the deck is very, very good with like Scrap Trawler and Mirror Retriever and all that. Obviously, it's a lot worse without like Mox Opal, but I think the biggest issue with the deck is just the fact that unless your name is Matt Nass, you don't actually know how the deck works. But more importantly, people don't understand the deck, and it's not something that can easily be explained when you're talking about a lot of the minute interactions. So I think it's the kind of card that should just stay on the ban list, not because I think a 4-mana sorcery speed artifact is just insanely broken or anything like that, but because the logistics around running the card in an event, I think, are problematic. So that's my 2 cents. So let's keep going down the list. Blazing Shoal. I would put Blazing Shoal probably in like can make an argument for unbanning. Mainly, let me double check these as I go. So Blazing Shoal, if you don't know the card, it's an instant from OG Kamigawa or Betrayers of Kamigawa. 2 red and X. Target creature gets +X/+O until the end of the turn, and you can pay pay by exiling a card from your hand rather than paying its mana cost, and it gets +X/+O, where X is that creature's or that exiled card's mana cost. So part of the idea when this was actually a card legal and modern was you'd use Blazing Shoal with like Progenitus or any sort of before Progenitus, or actually after Progenitus, because Progenitus was Conflux. This was any sort of big red card. You could either use instants and sorceries that you could get off of like Peer Through Depths, or you could use Progenitus that you get off Summoner's Pact, whatever. Exile a big red card, Blazing Shoal, and pump up like your Infector really, really big. I think that removal has gotten a lot better, as well as stack-based interaction. So now we get things like Flusterstorm and Force of Negation, as well as removal like Fatal Push. So decks that couldn't previously interact very efficiently with threats like this now have a lot better ways of actually dealing with them. So I personally think there's an argument for unbanning Blazing Shoal. Whether it should or should not is up to each individual person, but I personally think that like interaction in Modern has gotten to a point where a really big pump spell isn't the end of the world. Like, we've got Solitudes running around, for Christ's sake. Like, what more do you want? There's not time to set up your creature-based combo deck as well. So Umezawa's Jitte never deserves to see the light of day. If you have ever played against Jitte, either in Cube, in a kitchen table match, whatever the case may be, you know that this card is absolutely insane in creature matchups. Like, if I'm playing creatures and you're playing creatures and I have an Umezawa's Jitte on the battlefield, I win. Period. Like, maybe there's some random sequence of draws that you can come up with, but very, very unlikely. The card just does so much, and the fact that the counters go on the Jitte instead of going on like the creature is a really big drawback. So even if you kill the creature, as long as it like did something, whether it be block a creature, attack in and get blocked, whatever, then all of a sudden you have this Umezawa's Jitte that can just like mess up all sorts of math. So I think it's probably safer to just stay banned. I say probably safer. It doesn't need to be in the probably safer category. It needs to be banned permanently. Glimpse. What is this? Glimpse of Nature? Yeah. So Glimpse of Nature, 1 mana sorcery. Whenever you play a creature spell, you draw a card. So really popular, like the old elves list, not only in Legacy, but elves in like extended and stuff like that way back in the day. Grape Shot Elves, LSV won a pro tour with. But the idea is just you snowball creatures, and every time you play a little creature, you get to draw a card. Really good with cards like Heritage Druid and Nettle Sentinel that allow you to play creatures, tap your elves for mana, play creatures, untap your elves off playing a green spell, a creature, and then drawing a card, using that mana to cast your new card, draw more cards, blah, 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 blah. I would I don't want to say that this card is like enough to make elves reasonable, because I've tried to mess around with like Grape Shot Elves and no ban list modern, and even if you do get all the pieces, it can be kind of inconsistent. So I'm gonna put Glimpse of Nature in like the probably safe to keep banned. I can't think of anything that comes out that just like changes that, but the fact that the card only goes in like a very specific kind of archetype, and it just happens to be insanely busted in that archetype, for me means like I'd probably just rather not mess with it. Sensei's Divining Top down here with KCI and the non-power level reasons. Because honestly, like 9 out of 10 top players are really, really bad at playing top. And I say that because I'm in that list. I'm terrible at playing top. But what you end up running into is people that are like, oh, at the end of your turn, I'm going to activate top. Cool. I'm going to go to my turn. I'm going to draw my card for turn. I'm going to activate top. All right. I'm going to play this spell. I'm going to pass the turn. Oh, you did nothing at the end of your turn. I'm going to activate top. And you're like, bruh. So many top activations for no actual gain. And that just ends up taking a lot of time, because each of those top activations is another like 5, 6, 7 seconds and can happen 3, 4 times in a turn. Just not worth it. Do not recommend. 0 out of 10. Keep top banned for logistical reasons. Next up is Rite of Flame. So 1 red to add 2 red to your mana pool, and then you add an additional red for every other copy of Rite of Flame in your graveyard. If you've ever heard of the card Dragonstorm, you're probably familiar with Rite of Flame. Rite of Flame's kind of a tough one for me. Like, I don't mind having mana accelerants in the format. 1 mana to 2 isn't too big of a deal, but I think as soon as you draw like that second Rite of Flame in an opening hand, then it becomes a little difficult to judge, because now you're talking about like 1 red, I cast a Rite of Flame, I make 2, I cast a second Rite of Flame, use 1, make 2, then make an additional 1 off the first one in the graveyard. Now I've got 4 red mana on turn 1, and I can like Karn the Great Creator or Blood Moon or whatever. So I think I'm going to put Rite of Flame in like the probably safe to say banned. I don't think mana acceleration at face value is ban worthy most of the time. But I think when you have the ability to snowball so much on turn 1 in Modern, in like Legacy, Rite of Flame's fine, because you've got Daze and Force of Will and a lot of stuff that can interact with it. You see like turn 1 Thalias all the time. But in Modern, I just don't think you have the tools to keep up with it. So it's probably safer to keep it on the ban list. Next up is Dark Depths. Again, I'm going to put this in like the same category as Rite of Flames. And at the moment, I don't have these like in any particular order going across the row, but I might kind of start shuffling stuff around to say, oh, the farthest to the left is the highest up in that category. And if that's the case, I'd probably put Dark Depths between Glimpse and Rite of Flames. Like, I think there's more ways to interact with a Dark Depth than an early Rite of Flames, but Modern itself does not have very good land interaction. We don't have Wasteland, we don't have Strip Mine, Field of Ruin, and the new functional reprint of Field of Ruin are like pretty bad when it comes to any sort of interaction early. So I think for that, I would keep Dark Depths on the ban list. Faithless Looting. Oh man, Faithless Looting. I wish I had a spot like right between probably safe to keep banned and could make an argument for unbanning. It's the kind of card that if you could say, hey, Faithless Looting is legal in the format, but you can only use it for fair decks, I'd be like, oh yeah, unban it, 100%. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You can't guarantee that it only get used in fair decks. Something will always break Faithless Looting. And now, especially that you have what's it called? Like persist in the format. Faithless Looting gets even better. So I'll probably say now that Modern's got a 2-mana reanimate spell, I'm gonna put it in the probably safe to say or safe to keep banned category, but like on the very low end of it, like this is probably gonna be my lowest card on this entire row, but we'll see. Uh Mycosynthillatus. Oh man. Um I'm actually probably gonna put Mycosynthillatus in the can make an argument for unbanning. And a lot of the reason there is like Tron's pretty bad. Modern's moving faster than it was a couple years ago when like Karn Lattice was such a big issue. And I think there are some like slower, rampier style decks that could use a way to close out the game. But at the same time, we do see things like Aspiring Spikes, what is it? Timeless Lotus deck that's making like ridiculous amounts of mana on turn 3. And if you could Karn for a Lattice, that would effectively lock out the game. So actually, I'll probably just move it down to like ban for logistic reasons. As soon as you get your Mycosynth Lattice down and just like lock everybody out of the game, it's so much of that is, hey, I've got a Lattice and I can't actually close the game out unless you like animate the Lattice and start hitting them in the face. But so maybe it's not a logistic thing. Maybe it's just deserves to stay banned, but like still ahead of Faithless Looting. I don't know. I think this is another one that's like right in this little between category for me. It's like good, but it's not something insane compared to what Tron can already do. Like, what's the difference between bridging you out and latticing you out? And especially now with cards like Unholy Heat and Fury and stuff that can kill Karn a lot easier. Man, that really is close. I'll just keep it there for safety's sake. Skull Clamp, never unban it. The last thing I want is like affinity to get Skull Clamp and just start throwing away old Mim Knights and Vault Scourges or whatever else and drawing a bunch of cards. Like, no. Also run the issue of the fact that you can double check before I say anything stupid. You can get your Skull Clamp off an Urza Saga, and that does not sound fun to me. So Skull Clamp, stay banned. Once Upon a Time, I'm gonna say can make an argument for unbanning. It's probably closer to the keep safe or safe to keep banned, but I think Once Upon a Time is a really, really fun card. And I guess I'll actually put it down in the my choice. Realistically, I think it's safe to keep banned. But I think that, to me at least, the card is really good in decks that aren't relevant in modern right now, like Tron and Eldrazi Tron. Amulet Titan's relevant, but not to the degree of some of these other like high powered modern decks. And maybe Once Upon a Time helps that a little bit. Maybe we need a degenerate combo deck. So I'm just gonna put it down here in like the my choice. Oko. Oko. I'm probably gonna say never deserves the light of day. And this, all right, I'm gonna put Oko in two categories. Never deserves the light of day and functional edits. First of all, never deserves the light of day because I have a personal bias against this card. If you've ever heard me rant about it, I was at a Star City Games tournament and I had, I think, 3 losses on the weekend. Ended up in like 11th place. 2 of my losses were game 3. I had lethal on board, and my opponent top decked an Oko. One, they were at 5 life. They top decked an Oko, and I had a Gurmag Angler out, and they elked my Gurmag, and I couldn't attack through to them. I couldn't kill the Oko, and so I attacked the Oko, and the next turn they like made a food. I think played out some sort of a chump blocker, like a Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and I couldn't attack through it, just like a Teamer Scape Shift deck. And the other loss was to a Sultai Death Shadow player. That game 3, I had a Shadow out, I got lethal on board, and just draws Oko, elk your Shadow. Dang. So I think this is the kind of card that just single-handedly like spins things around like nobody's business. I saw a feature match with an Oko deck against humans where the Oko player just like, elk that guy, kill this other one. They attack it, Oko, cool, untap, play an artifact, elk my artifact, trade off there, kill this other guy. Next turn, make a food. They attack Oko down to like 2 or 1. Untap, elk my food, block this guy to trade off. And it's just like Oko single handedly turned this entire game around. So I think Oko does not need to be unbanned ever in its current state. That being said, we have this functional edit category where I say, like, I think Oko would be slightly less egregious if you swapped the +2 and the +1, and if you made either of them like a 0 instead of a plus. Or not. No, it's not swap the +2 +1. It's just make either of them a 0 or a minus. Like if you make the elk something a -1 instead of a +1, I think the card is worse enough to where you can consider unbanning it. Not that I'm calling for it to get unbanned. Okay, down the list. Mystic Sanctuary. I want to say never deserves the light of day, but I think I'm going to end up putting it like near the top of safe to keep banned. And this is also taking into account like the current modern environment and just being able to Mystic Sanctuary back like expressive iterations sounds abysmal. Like, hey, I just need to keep drawing an expressive iteration every single turn from now until the end of the game. Cool. Here's 4 Mystic Sanctuaries I can tutor up. Obviously only goes in like your heavy island deck, but now especially with triomes and stuff, islands are a dime a dozen. And how would you feel if like your creativity opponent got to turn 4 go for a creativity, turn 5 tutor up a Mystic Sanctuary with their Teamer Triome, Steam Vents, dwarven mind. Here's a mystic sanctuary. Get back creativity because you can. That again sounds pretty horrible to me. On Bridge from Below, banned for the sake of Hogak. I'm gonna say unban. I think Bridge from Below is fine. Like, I don't think there's any super degenerate combo decks right now that uh, it goes along with. So probably okay. Crabvine needs a boost anyway. So unban Bridge from Below. Why not? Luris of the Dream Den. One of my favorite cards that's been printed in the last several years. Definitely in my functional edit category because I think if and I'll go ahead and put Yori on here too. I think if they removed the word companion from both of these, they would be perfectly reasonable magic cards. But since they have companion, you can't really look at them as perfectly reasonable. So you'd have to functionally reprint both of them without the word companion. So that's a big reason why I made this category is like I think the card without the broken mechanic is fine. When you add in the broken mechanic, the broken card becomes broken. It's kind of the same thing as initiative and legacy right now. Like the cards that have initiative aren't that good, but they're broken because they say the word initiative. Same thing with the companions. Okay. Tybalt's Trickery. I think you can make a good argument for Trickery since like Flusterstorm is a lot more relevant right now. Flusterstorm's introduced to the format. You've got Counterspell in the format. Um, Stuff like that. I would put this on like the higher end, like closer to the probably safe to keep banned side, because I do think that like Valky is a lot more troublesome to deal with than rhinos or living in any of the other like cascade targets. So I do want to denote that part of it. But I think with like cascade decks in general being such a big part of the format right now, Simian Spirit Guide being banned, no consistent fast mana for any of these decks, then I think Tybalt's Trickery gets a little bit safer. Again, not that I'm calling for it to be unbanned, but I just think that you could make an argument in the current state of Modern. Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. I'd put both of these on like the never deserve to see the light of day. Fetch lands are too popular. Mishra's baubles everywhere. Delirium's like already such a big part of Modern. I just don't think you can afford to have any deck splashing blue for a 1-mana draw 3, especially when a lot of decks don't care about their graveyard. Like imagine Living End or Rhinos, especially something like that, just getting a Treasure Cruise or a Dig Through Time. Like that sounds pretty rough. You've already seen Rhinos with like a Murktide region or two, but if you just replace that with Treasure Cruise, I'm off it. Ponder and Preordain. I love that a lot of these are like kind of grouped together, so it makes it easier to address everything at once. Ponder and Preordain, I would say they're actually going to go in two different categories for me. I think Ponder is on the probably safe to keep banned side. I think Preordain I would put on the can make an argument for unbanning. And again, like the farther left we go on this category, is the closer I think it gets to staying banned. So I think Preordain's like a little bit lower than Tybalt's Trickery, a little bit safer than Trickery. And it's mainly just because you don't see that third card like you would with Ponder. So Ponder does dig a little bit deeper, lets you draw the card. With the fetches, the drawback of like putting them back on top doesn't really matter that much. But preordain, I think modern needs a good cantrip. It might be a little unsafe with like Murktide running around, so I'm okay putting it like ahead of Blazing Shoal. But I think just having like a reasonable cantrip in modern is fine. Storm's basically unplayable right now. It needs some sort of a boost. Field of the Dead. Oh, somewhere between Never Deserves the Light of Day and probably safe to keep banned. I'm gonna say I'm gonna put it over here with the other lands. Mainly because like lands typically have the same issues. You just can't interact with them very well. If we had like a better stifle effect in modern, maybe. But Field of the Dead just gave like Amulet Titan such a good way of getting out of an unwinnable position. Same thing with like the 4 or 5 color Uro piles before Uro hit its very, very timely demise. But it just gives an incentive to play like 50 don't kill me cards, and then eventually Field of the Dead will be online. So maybe that's even like a logistics issue. So somewhere between here and like the tournament logistics, when your deck just says, I don't actually win, I just don't lose. All right. Green Sun Zenith. I think if Dryad Arbor didn't exist, I'd be straight up on like unbanned Green Sun Zenith. But since Dryad Arbor exists, I'm going to put it in the can make an argument, but pretty close to the ban side of it. And it's mainly because, like, yes, Dryad Arbor exists. There's also a bunch of removal for Dryad Arbor that didn't exist 7-8 years ago. Unholy Heat, Fatal Push, what's it called? March of Otherworldly Light. Solitude, Fury, all that stuff. So it's a little bit better, but I do think it's a card that, like it's been pointed out in all of the ban discussions, it scales very, very well. So it's hard to make a solid argument for unbanning it, but I do think that like removal's better, interaction's better. Green Suns is like a little bit safer. Hogak, not a chance in hell. Not a chance. If you had to deal with Hogak and play against it regularly, you know that that card has no business being off the ban list. Too much for too little, like enables combos, enables the beatdown plan. It's so much easier than it should be to actually get it onto the battlefield. And when it is on the battlefield, it's bigger than 95% of the stuff out there. So, no gack. Arkham's Astrolabe. For me, I say it's closer to the Never Deserves the Light of Day, but I'm going to put it. Do I think it's better than Sanctuary? Yes. Do I think it's better than Field of the Dead? Yes. Do I think it's better than Rite of Flame? Probably not. So Arkham's Astrolabe, if you haven't played with this abomination of a card, it's a 1 mana artifact, a snow mana. ETB, you draw a card, and then you pay 1 and tap it, and you make one. I think it's make a snow mana of any color. So you can use it to enable like your 4 or 5 color pile to help you play around Blood Moon, filter whatever you need your mana to be. It turns on like Ice Fang Coatls because it's a snow permanent. It doesn't force you to play green early. like what's the other one now? The one that some of the 4-color battle decks play. One green enchant land, ETB draws a card. It doesn't require that, so you don't have to worry about like your land getting Field of Ruined or anything of the sort. But more importantly, it just enables like all of your lands to just turn into whatever you need while playing around Blood Moon. You only have to get like one basic and then your entire deck's online. It's a stupid Magic card. Second Sunrise, non-power level reasons. Like I I don't want to go back to a modern that rounds are going like 30 minutes over time and people are fizzling. Not worth it. Hate the idea. So I would absolutely keep Second Sunrise on the needs to be banned for non-power level reasons. We'll just kind of keep on going. Seething Song. I'm going to say you can make an argument for unbanning Seething Song. I think it's actually like probably safer than Green Suns. Not as safe as Preordain. Like going from 3 to 5 mana is whatever nowadays. Occasionally you might have a deck that just goes, oh, turn 3, I'm gonna Seething Song, and then use that mana to Seething Song and cast a Karn. I don't know, turn 3 Karn. That's an insane idea in Modern. Who could ever imagine such a thing? Does it help out Storm? Maybe. Does Storm need the help? Yeah, quite a bit. So I'm pretty in favor of Seething Song. I think that like once you get past turn 3, it doesn't really matter how much mana you have. Like either you've got payoffs that are functional or you don't. I don't think Storm really has a ton of functional payoffs. Chrome Mox is in the never or needs to never be unbanned. Let me reorder this. So like the farther left, the more problematic I think the card is. And I'm going to put Chrome Mox like probably right behind Jitte or right behind Skull Clamp. These are like A and B, Jitte and Skull Clamp. So I think they could go kind of either way. I think Chrome Mox is like right behind them because it does make you go down a card, but literally any deck can play it outside of like your Cascade variants. Um, and decks like Taxes or something that are just looking for a way to get ahead on mana early really take advantage of cards like Chrome Mox. So I think it's the fact that it can fit into just about any deck and not have a lot of downside is enough of a reason to keep it banned to me. So now we got all the artifact lands, or let's do Cloud Post first. We'll do Cloud Post up here with like our little land chunk. It's really easy to combine a lot of these lands because it basically comes down to in Modern there's just not good ways to interact with lands. So a lot of them end up in that same situation of like these will win you the game eventually. Not really much you can do about them till then. So good luck. The artifact lands, however, I think are a little bit different. I think I'd put these in the never deserve to see the light of day. Probably pretty close to like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. And it's mostly because these cards are getting so much better every time new stuff that cares about artifacts is printed. Like we've got Thought Monitor in Modern Horizons 2. That gets exponentially better with artifact lands. We've got Nettle Cyst that has come out since these were printed. We're seeing a resurgence in Frogmite. We've got the new functional Mirror Enforcer, the Sojourner that like artifact land cycles. You've got the what's it called? Ensoul Artifact They can just like strap up to one of your lands and make it a 5/5. So I get that some of the artifact hate is better, but I don't think it's better to the point that it can compete with the power of the lands. Like, obviously, Stony Silence and Collector Oof and stuff like that have been printed, which you would think makes these a little bit worse, but at the same time, you've got like Metallic Rebuke that are in the format. So it's very, very easy for artifacts to outpower the effects that stop them. We've got like Shrapnel Blast, we've got Galvanic Blast to help deal with a lot of that stuff. Obviously, you have to float mana or have mana available before those come down, but also Urza Saga. Urza Saga making constructs, and your constructs being 2 or 3 power bigger just because you played out lands. Gitaxian Probe. So I'm going to put Gitaxian Probe either on the very high end of unban or the very low end of argument for unbanning. And it's basically because, like, the zoo decks that really relied on Gitaxian Probe, Infect, stuff like that, are getting more and more stifled by the fact that your opponents just have better interaction now. Your Tarmogoyfs aren't relevant because Fatal Push and Unholy Heat and that kind of stuff are in the format. Solitude's in the format. So knowing about your opponent's removal, their prismatic endings, and their leyline bindings, and whatever, doesn't suddenly make all of your threats that much better when they just have the interaction. And maybe it's okay to have like a Gitaxian Probe, Apostle's Blessing style creature deck in the format. But I think that just knowing about your opponent's stuff is not doing anything to stop them from having it currently. And I think that stopping them from having it is definitely the big kicker here. So I'm actually going to put Gitaxian Probe in, like, yeah, unban it. Well, no, because Murktide is a very popular deck. So I'm going to put in argument for unbanning. I'll put it ahead of Blazing Shoal so people don't yell at me too much. But personally, I think the card's a lot safer. One of the cards so high up on my unban please list, and Mental Misstep. If you have ever heard me rant about this card, I love Mental Misstep. I think it is probably one of my top, like, 4 or 5 Magic cards of all time, with like Spell Stutter Sprite and probably Spell Stutter and like Teamer Battle Rage. But Mental Misstep is the card that I think is the poster child for misunderstood as to why it is banned and why it deserves to be unbanned. So I'll go through my full spiel in a second. When Mental Misstep was banned, Modern was so pushed towards 1 mana, being as efficient as possible. Like, let's pull up the come on. I can't find what I wanted to find. I wanted to find a list of like the decks that were legal when Mental Misstep was banned. And it's basically things like, Tron was around, and Burn and Splinter Twin and oh, what's it called? Zoo decks that were like so pushing down the curve that it was a format where I ran 4 mental misstep to combat your 4 mental misstep because your 4 mental misstep were combating the rest of my deck, and I had to even out the fight somehow. Nowadays, I think that Modern is pushing itself back up the curve, whether it wants to or not. Like, you've got leyline bindings and things that are cheap but a high CMC. You've got pitch elementals. You've got Teferis and Fable of the Mirror Breakers and Murktide's cheating on mana, Expressive Iteration, Burns cheating on mana with things like Rift Bolt and what's it called? Skewer the Critics going up the curve. Amulet Titan doesn't need to cast their amulets. They've got Urza's Sagas. Arboreal Grazers kind of whatever. You've got decks like Death Shadow that live in the 1 mana realm, but I don't know what I would cut for mental missteps to try to fight someone else's missteps that might not even be there. And if they're not there, this is just a dead card. I think Modern is a very self-correcting format in that if mental misstep is brought back in, people immediately start playing a bunch of mental missteps to fight the other missteps. And then eventually somebody just clicks and says, hey, what if I just like stop running so many 1-drops? I just invalidated 4 cards out of my opponent's deck. I don't need to run missteps to stop their missteps. Let's just up the curve a little bit. Let's go over the top of mental misstep. And then eventually missteps are going to start backing down. And then you'll have people reduce the curve again to try to get under everybody that's not running misstep. And then misstep picks back up. And I think it's fine to have those cycles like Dredge and Affinity and decks like that ride on cycles. So why not mental misstep? So I would say unban it. I personally actually think it is safe to unban mental misstep, but I get that that's not the popular opinion. So it probably needs to be in like the safe to keep banned, maybe the top of the argument for the sake of everybody else playing the game of Magic. But I'm going to put it in the my choice pile because I think the card is great. Birthing Pod, I'm going to say safe to keep banned. It's very, very good, obviously, but I do 100% agree with the argument of design space, where the more you print creatures that do something, especially when they enter, the more Birthing Pod gets shifted towards never sees the light of day. You just can't, like, we've seen the design trend in Magic for a while where more and more stuff have ETB effects, more and more cards are doing something right away because it feels bad when your thing gets killed and you don't get anything out of it. So you see more of those ETB do something, die do something, and that just makes Birthing Pod like so much better. And you just can't keep a card like Birthing Pod around with that design space philosophy. So I think Birthing Pod, unfortunately, has to stay banned for the sins of the Wizards of the Coast development team. But I appreciate the direction that Magic's gone for the most part. And I think Birthing Pod is just like a casualty on the way. Simian Spirit Guide. So two arguments here. One, Cascade is like so high in popularity in Modern that you cannot give them a free turn, the ability to speed up their clock by a turn or maybe even more than that if they have 2 spirit guides. So I think you have to keep spirit guide banned. It's whether or not it's safe to keep banned. I think it's probably closer to like the bottom of the never see the light of day. But for me, I don't think anything free should exist in the format. And I have to say this because this overrides my stance on like mental misstep and Gitaxian probe and stuff like that. I don't believe there should be any effects in modern that don't require you to pay some amount of mana, even if it's only 1 mana. And no, paying life instead of mana does not constitute as paying mana. Dismember is fine because you have to pay a mana. Gitaxian probe, not fine because you can choose to not pay any mana. And I think anything that requires you to not pay some sort of mana should be out of the format, period. And it's a whole lot more cards than you think it is, ranging from the evoke elementals to commandeer to force of negation, Mishra's Bauble, Ornithopter, Memnite, like any of those, I think should be gone. But I'm not on the design team, nor am I on the ban list team, so I have no control over that. But I have to point out that that overrides my stances on anything like Blazing Shoal, Mental Misstep, Gitaxian Probe, Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, whatever. I personally believe all those should be banned. But we're just like assuming that rule is not in place. So if we ignore that, this is kind of where the list comes from. Golgari Grave Troll. I was watching a video on modern bans earlier, and they essentially put Golgari Grave Troll super high on the list of should never be unbanned. And it's basically because WotC already tried unbanning it once, had to reban it, just not going through that again. I think if we take that argument out of the equation and say strictly based on power level, I think Grave Troll is like towards the end of safe to keep banned. Obviously, since Grave Troll first got printed and legalized in modern, we've had things like Cathartic Reunion and Creeping Chill, Prized Amalgam enter the format, stuff like that. That's just made dredge like nuts. So the more that you're able to dredge, the better all those other cards get. The more payoffs you have in your graveyard, the better Golgari Grave Troll gets. So I think it's probably on like the just keep it out of the format side. But at the same time, it is just like a bigger enabler for a deck that isn't really enabled very well. But I think I would rather see like troll than looting for dredge specifically, but looting over troll for like the rest of the format. So Splinter Twin. Splinter Twin, Splinter Twin, Splinter Twin. I like the idea of having a police card in the format, just something that says like, hey, if you're not going to win before turn 4, you need to be interacting. You can't just like sit here and do nothing for the rest of the game. But Splinter Twin cannot exist in a format with Ragavan. It just cannot happen. You cannot allow a format that has turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Exarch, turn 3 possibility of Splinter Twin, even if it's just like Ritual into Twin, whatever, cannot be allowed to happen. So I would rather see Twin like never released or never unbanned than unbanned into a format with Ragavan. But I'm going to make this judgment off of the idea that Ragavan is like pretty high on a list of cards that I think should be banned, which I guess we'll have to do a video on that someday. So I'm going to base this on the assumption that Ragavan gets banned at some point. And I'm going to say you can make an argument for it better than Green Suns, not as good as Seething Song. I think Seething Song is safer to unban than Splinter Twin, but I think Twin is probably a bit less or a bit safer than Green Suns, mainly because of like I said, Dryad Arbor. But if Ragavan and Dryad Arbor are gone, then I can see adjusting that spot of the tier list. Good old Deathrite Shaman. I say unban. Like, I think it's less safe than Bridge from Below, but again, Fatal Push is in the format. Unholy Heat's Premier Removal. Prismatic Endings in the format. March of Otherworldly Light to Fairy, which obviously Deathrite Shaman does not particularly care for being bounced. Mid range, like actual mid range, not Omnath. I should clarify. I don't think Deathrite needs to be in the format if Omnath is in the format, because like mana fixing and another payoff for having a bunch of colors, whatever. But I do like Deathrite as like a check to Renin 6 decks. That's really cool. And I think that it does force like some of the uninteractive decks to be a little more interactive early. So I'm gonna put Deathrite on like, yeah, unban it. It's fine. Mox Opal. So Oko's gone. We still have Gilded Goose. We still have Emery. Still have Mishra's Bauble. I'm gonna put Opal in like the safe to stay band. But I'm gonna put it kind of low on the safe to stay band. Like, I think it's more difficult to unban than Looting, Grave Troll, Ponder, Lattice. Pretty close to Glimpse, I think. Which I think I'm actually going to put Opal above Glimpse and move Birthing Pod back down below Glimpse. I think Birthing Pod's a little bit safer than Glimpse of Nature. But I think Mox Opal is a little more dangerous than both of them. And kind of the same idea as the lands. Like, it's really difficult to interact with artifacts early and often. And Opal kind of demands that you do. But this would be one of the cards that if you had to pay mana for everything would get the axe. Oh, Uro. What is it? Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath or something? Uro. I'm going to put Uro safe to keep unbanned. Or safe to keep banned, sorry. Uro's probably worse than the lands, actually. Uro's probably like had an Astrolabe right behind. I'll put it Uro ahead of Rite of Flames. Uro is a stupid magic card if you're any sort of like mid-range deck or anything that's trying to gain a value foothold. One of my favorite stories is I was playing Infect, blue-green Infect, and I jump into a league and I play against a mono-red opponent who's playing like lava darts and lightning bolts. What's it called? That was it Firebolt, the 1 mana 2 damage, and then you could flash it back for like 6 or 5, whatever. Flame Slash, and Burst Lightning, like the works for red based burn and removal. And I'm playing Infect. In my sideboard, I just have like 3 or 4 copies of Uro. And game one, of course, I lose because I can't fight over all the interaction, especially all the free stuff with like flashing back darts. But I just board into all these Uros and they single handedly win game 2 and 3, and it's not even close. Like my opponent just cannot do anything against me Uroing. And that's really what happened in a lot of modern games was you would be on the front foot, be in a good spot, and your opponent just drops an Uro, and you don't think like gain 3 life, draw a card is going to be that insane. Absolutely is, because it's usually Uro, put in an extra land. The extra land lets me like path something or interact somehow, hold up a counter spell, and then in a couple turns I get to escape my Uro and do the same thing again. But I've gained 6 life. I've drawn 2 cards. I've got a 6/6 body that you have to deal with, or he's going to attack and gain more life and draw more cards. And I just think that like the value on it is so exponentially high. Speaking of exponentially high, whoever made Uro and Croxa and looked at these side by side and said, yeah, you know what? They're kind of mirrored. That person needs to be fired from WotC. Because anyone who thinks that drawing a card is equivalent to your opponent discarding their worst card and always gaining 3 life versus maybe taking 3 damage are anywhere equivalent is insane. And like playing an extra land versus, well, if they discard a land, they take 3. Cool, whatever. Nobody cares. Like, these couldn't be any farther from just like polar opposites on how good they are. But whatever. Uro stay banned. Dread Return. We don't have the ability to just like pick up and flip the entire library in modern, like a hermit druid effect. So Dread Return, I don't think is ever going to be just insanely busted. That being said, we do have Narcomoeba. We've got Prized Amalgam. The 2 mana or 3 mana 3/1, whatever it is, the one that gets back if your opponent lost 3 life or you gain life or something. The one that triggers with Creeping Chill. Got all those. You got like Haunted Dead and stuff that you can get back and make bodies. So I think that getting the bodies on board for Dread Return isn't the most difficult thing in the world, but it's not like legacy easy. And as long as you can fill up the graveyard, you can find a payoff. I don't think Modern really needs a free, essentially, reanimate spell. So I'm going to put it on the safe to keep band. And I'm going to put it... I think I'm going to put it right above the lands. Mainly because the lands are slower at enabling and often don't like win the game on the spot. But Dread Return is usually going to be used to get back something like Iona that just shuts off the game right then and there. Speaking of the lands, I think I'm going to move. No, this is probably fine. Never mind. Scratch that. Hypergenesis. I think Hypergenesis is fine to unban. Mainly because like all of the Cascade targets we're hitting already might not actually end the game on the spot, but have a reasonable chance to functionally end the game. And Hypergenesis is in that same realm. Like, if you Hypergenesis into, I don't know, an Emrakul, like, you're probably going to win that game. But if you Hypergenesis in, or you cascade into a living end and it resolves, you're probably winning that game just as well. So I don't know if Hypergenesis to me does anything just like more busted than living end. The suspend cost is a little bit more restrictive, but not like a lot. Mainly just being cheaper. But I think just without Simian Spirit Guide, the payoffs are whatever. Like you have decks that are already cheating in big payoffs. Hypergenesis gives you another option. You also can't run like a critical mass of interaction with Hypergenesis because then you run the risk of like drawing your interaction, not drawing your payoffs, where like living end, all your payoffs are just cycling to find your living ends. So you're always going to have your payoffs there, assuming your opponent doesn't rest in peace your yard. So I think Hypergenesis actually has like a bigger fail rate than living end, especially if somebody thought seizes you and takes your Emrakul out of hand or whatever. Summer Bloom. Good old Summer Bloom. I'm going to say functional edit to Summer Bloom, and let me specify why I think that is. If you know the original text on Summer Bloom, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. So let's find OG Summer Bloom. We need a portal Summer Bloom. Okay. OG Portal Summer Bloom says take up to 3 lands from your hand and put them into play. You've got your hand, you've got 3 lands in your hand, put them onto the battlefield at one time. I think there's an argument that is really good, but a lot better than, hey, I've got this one bounce land. Let me just replay it 3 times with an amulet. Like, no, you have to have the 3 bounce lands in hand to get this Titan right here on turn 2. And if your hand is land, amulet, bounce land, bounce land, bounce land, Summer Bloom, Titan, you can get a Titan. That's all it takes. Like untap land on 1, amulet on, or untap land, amulet on 1, bounce land on 2, play Summer Bloom. Have to put all of your lands into play. You don't get this subsequential extra land drop thing. No, one time, all lands that are going in with Summer Bloom have to go in. If you have the 3 bounce lands, you can play them. All the triggers go in the stack after Summer Bloom resolves. Untap, float your mana, pick them all back up, play your Titan. If you've got a Summoner's Pact and you have to pack for your Titan, then here's your opponent's chance to interact and just like kill you. So I'm going to say if they functionally reprinted or edited Summer Bloom to say you've got to put the lands in at one time and not say you get 3 additional land drops, you can play 3 additional lands, then I might have an okay opinion of Summer Bloom. But I don't see them editing it in that way, so I'm not too worried about that happening. Eye of Ugin, never unban Eye of Ugin. I think that it is more egregious than the artifact lands. Probably more egregious than Dig and Treasure Cruise. In fact, I think I'm going to move Treasure Cruise and Dig like below the artifact lands. A lot of the reasoning is, yes, it is less universally playable than like Chrome Mox, but it is also substantially more impactful in the decks that it does go into. So if you don't know Eye of Ugin, it makes all of your colorless stuff cost 2 less. So your Thought-Knot Seers just cost 2. So if you have like Eye of Ugin plus an Urborg or Yavimaya, now all of a sudden your thought knots cost 2 less from the Eye of Ugin, and you get to use your Urborg or whatever to help cast your thought knot seer. Um, yeah, don't do it. Keep them out of here. Keep them far, far away. And it's not even that I think like colorless Eldrazi is the best deck in no ban list modern, because I don't. I think it's a good deck. I don't think it's the best deck, even though people have this idea that it seems to run every form or every no ban list tournament out there, and it doesn't. So whatever. Keep your opinions. Um, but I just don't think Eye of Ugin's a card you even want to mess with like that much free mana potential. Because a turn 1 Eye and like a Mimic, turn 2 Thought, what is it? Eldrazi Temple, Thought Knot, whatever the case may be. Like you've already accumulated 4 free mana off that. Let's say you've got 2 Mimics in a turn 2 Thought Knot Seer, then you've gotten 6 free mana off of this land in 2 turns. And yeah, it doesn't tap for mana, but you don't care at that point. Like you've gotten the effect of that land 6 times over. And then the very last card on the list, Punishing Fire. Oh. So it's kind of two-sided for me, mainly because if people play Punishing Fire, it means that they're playing Grove of the Burn Willows, and I don't want people gaining me life as a Death Shadow player. So I tend to put Punishing Fire a little bit higher than I should, but at the same time, like, there's not really a lot of creature-based decks that Punishing Fire just kind of wrecks over. The machine gun effect of it, being able to get it back with Grove of the Burn Willows, is not a fast interaction. It's just inevitable. So even if your opponent does have like a relevant board, if you can stall out, you can get there with Punishing Fire. I don't think there's a lot of like aggro creature decks running around that care. Maybe if humans or elves or even merfolk was a little more popular, then Punishing Fire would be higher up on the list. Just like, oh, we don't want to wreck archetypes by unbanning Punishing Fire. But at the moment, there's really nothing to wreck with it. So I think I'm going to put it somewhere probably safer than Splinter Twin. Maybe like here. Well, no. I'm going to say Soothing Song is safer than Punishing Fire. Punishing Fire is safer than Splinter Twin. Yeah. I'm going to do that. All right. So that's my list. Hopefully you got a little bit of entertainment out of me going through it. Again, like the Never Deserves to See the Light of Day cards, I think that should never come off the ban list for any reason. Probably safe to keep banned is the cards that like I don't think fit that Never Deserve to See the Light of Day power level, but I think it would be better for the long-term health of the format to keep those cards on the ban list. The can make an argument for unbanning in current modern just means like, hey, I think this card was unbanned in a different time. We can probably revisit it now, maybe have different results. Unban You Cowards is my selection for cards that I think should be legal in the format. Functional edits. Oko changing one of the pluses to a minus ability, I think makes it a little safer, especially the Elk ability. Make the Elk ability like a -1, and we can talk about Oko, or -2 even, probably -2. Luris and Yorion remove the companion part of them, and Summer Bloom make it like the original text would imply, that you get to put 3 lands from your hand onto the battlefield, and that's it. You don't get to make 3 additional land drops. So you can't go bounce land, pick it up, bounce land, pick it up, bounce land, pick it up. No, you have to have 3 bounce lands in your hand right now to get the effect. Once Upon a Time and Mental Misstep are cards that I would like to see back in the format, but I don't think you can really make a power level argument for them. They're just cards that, like, I think give you some cool creative options, or in the case of Mental Misstep, I think the format can adapt, but it couldn't at the time that the card was banned. And then the banned for non-power level reasons is just cards that create like nightmare scenarios for tournament organizers, having to answer judge calls about KCI and when priority is or isn't obtained and what you can or can't do with priority. Sensei's Divining Top just allowing your one of the players to have activations over and over again, running through the clock, and then Second Sunrise for the fizzle potential, but more importantly, the time it takes to actually go through a combo turn. So yeah, hope this was entertaining. Let me know in the comments down below what kind of cards you would like to see unbanned, and if I should do a video on the cards currently in Modern that I would like to see added to this list. I think that would be interesting. Otherwise, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.